Good morning and welcome back to Lopes on Movies. For today's show, we have something really exciting for you all. If you, like me, played a lot of video games in the late 90s and early 2000s, chances are you're familiar with the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series. I recently discovered that one of the producers of the games, Ralph D'Amato, was working on a documentary about the making of the games called Pretending I'm a Superman, due for release sometime this year. As someone who absolutely loved the Tony Hawk games growing up and who always thought they were something really special, I just had to ask Ralph for an interview to learn more about the film. Lucky for us, he accepted, so that's what we'll be doing today. As a side note, if you like what you hear, be sure to check out our Lopes on Movies YouTube channel. For this episode in particular, we'll have a slightly longer cut of the episode up, since Ralph and I talked for way longer than our time slot allows. But that's enough of that. Let's get to the interview. Ralph, thank you so much for joining me on the show. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Yeah, thanks for having me, for sure.
Of course.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, this is, I think this is going to be really exciting for a lot of people. The Tony Hawk games were definitely a major part of a lot of people's lives, so I can't wait to hear a little bit more of the inside story.
All right, I'm ready to tell it.
All right.
At least what I can remember.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So to start, I just want to talk a little bit about your background as well as your involvement in the Tony Hawk games. So, how did you get involved in making video games in general, and how did you eventually become a part of the Tony Hawk team?
Okay, so when I was going to college, there were no like video game production field. There was no field for it at all. When I was going to school, I graduated in '92. So when I was going to school, video games were very, small. Video game teams were very small. One guy, two people, whatever. So I graduated with a degree in marketing and business, and I started in sales. And I did quite well in sales. I was selling network services before the internet and all this other good stuff that you guys can't relate to at all. But I was friends through a friend. I was friends with through an ex. I was friends with the owner of Neversoft, Joel Jewett. And
Okay.
This was back when Neversoft was still kind of struggling days. Skeleton Warriors, just early on PlayStation 1 days. And, I went on several camping trips and water skiing trips to Joel, and we talked about his company, and I was fascinated because I've been a video game head. I grew up in the arcades. My experience with video games is much different than today. I was dropping quarters in arcade machines, but I've always loved video games, even through college, playing some of the very early on PC games. So I was always fascinated about the stories Joel had to tell, and he knew that I was super, excited about video games. And he also knew, I told him what I was a sales guy, but I also managed the projects afterwards. So he kind of understood I had a good degree of being able to manage things, processes at least. So he called me and he offered me to come in and interview because they had a couple of video games that they were getting, that they were going to get signed on to do. They had just, or were about to complete Apocalypse for Activision, which had gone through a couple different developers at the time. Again, it was a PS1 game featuring Bruce Willis, and it was sort of like a Robotron / Smash TV controls.
Yeah, I heard of this.
Yeah, so they just finished that, and they did a great job for Activision. So Activision was going to give them 2 more video games. I was fortunate enough to interview Mick West, who is the lead programmer. He liked me, I think, primarily. Well, one of the reasons was I was very IT knowledgeable. I could build computers, I could run computer networks, mail servers, all that good stuff that you had to do back in the day before Gmail and all this stuff. Right. So that was what Mick part of what Mick was doing, and he saw an opportunity to offload it to me. So long story short, I got the position. I got the offer to go and work at Neversoft, and I completely switched careers and took a leap of faith and went over and started working at Neversoft. And I remember Joel basically telling me that he had 2 games. One was a really big licensed video game. It was Spider-Man. And since I had no experience, I couldn't. It wasn't wouldn't have been the greatest thing to put me on a big licensed video game like that. And I agreed. So he put me on the small skateboarding game.
Wow,
and so that's kind of how I got into the Tony. That was my Tony Hawk 1 was my very first video game, and I worked on 8. I worked on 8 total. So 8 years. And when I say 8, Tony Hawk 1 to Project 8, but
Yeah.
along the way, we did multiple titles,
Hmm.
multiple versions and all that good stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, that's kind of how I got dropped into it.
Awesome.
It was kind of nice to have that be my first video game.
Yeah, well, hitting it out of the park right from the beginning, right?
Yeah, somebody upstairs or somebody was looking out for me for sure. Yeah.
So your role on the first game, I think, was credited as associate producer, and then for the rest of the games, I think it was just producer. So what did that entail exactly?
So shortly, shortly as I got there, it was pretty obvious that I knew a lot about video games from the user perspective, but I knew nothing about developing video games.
Sure.
So I helped soon after I got there. Scott Pease came over from Activision, and he had a ton of video game experience, and it was a great fit. He also loved skateboarding, and so I actually learned a lot from Scott, and I was delegated things that associate producers would do at the time. Deal with maintain the schedule, help up the design document,
Mm-hmm.
bring in focus testers. I was going to like junior highs and elementary schools and high schools and putting flyers up, which would probably get you arrested today. So I was doing that kind of stuff and, managing all the little odds and ends and learning as much as I could about the video game along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I skated a bit as a kid, so I kind of understood skateboarding. I would never call myself a skater because I never did tricks or anything. And the boards in the 70s and 80s weren't really conducive to that so much, but
Mm-hmm.
I used it for transportation. So, but I kind of understood, and I definitely watched skate videos, so I kind of understood a little bit of the ins and outs, and that helped a little bit. But it's just a lot of different odds and ends, and making sure people had what they needed to get their jobs done.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the film that you're working on. So
yep,
the main question I have is, what was it about your time working on the Tony Hawk series that made you think, this is something that's really special and it's a story that's really worth telling?
Well, that it was really a unique experience at the beginning of the series. The team that we had, it started with 13 to 14, people on the team, and the kind of the experience that we had and that we went through with very low, to little expectations of this video game, and then how it sort of just took on a life of its own, and
Mm-hmm.
we were in the background trying to support it and keep it going, and just the things that happened along the way, and then the overall impact that the game had, and on a variety of different levels, on skateboarding, on the video game world, in a variety of different places. So it just seemed to me that that would be a good story to tell. And I know our director, Ludwig Gurr, he's a huge fan of the video game.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty much like a walking encyclopedia of Tony Hawk. He can tell you what music track was in what game, all of that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I know he had been doing stuff on YouTube, and he had similar ideas and intents of perhaps one day doing a full-blown documentary. And
Mm-hmm.
our paths crossed on the internet, on YouTube. I saw one of the videos that he did. My wife encouraged me to reach out to him. I didn't, as a typical kind of older dude, I didn't want to comment on YouTube, so I did, though, eventually, to her urging, and which inspired us. Eventually we met him in Sweden. He came out here, we started talking, and that kind of launched the idea of, he had been thinking about it, I'd been thinking about it. He had been in film and been doing film. He had just won an award in Sweden for a short that he did.
Oh, wow.
So he's an amazing young filmmaker, amazing young director, and I had sort of all the production experience and contacts and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a great team.
Wow.
It's been a great team.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Even it was kind of scary because I thought I knew a lot about the game, but I would have to, I'd never, there are things like, I'm like, no, and I have to Google, and it was almost pretty much every time I was wrong, he was right.
That's so funny.
Once I knew that, I knew that's kind of an asset you can't help but want to work with on a film about this video game.
Oh yeah, of course.
So and then kick in that he's a great director, you know?
Yeah, that sounds like a really great team. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
So for the documentary, who do you imagine is like the ideal audience for this thing? Because obviously, like when I first heard about it, I was a huge Tony Hawk fan growing up, so this is like right up my alley. But are you imagining like a wider audience for this sort of thing that can really kind of dig into this and understand what it's all about?
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of where Ludwig kind of came to play as well, because my initial idea was video game, video game, video game,
Hmm.
and he kind of his direct, his director brain wanted to have more than just video game, and that's where we got to, and I'm super stoked on the results.
Hmm.
But it it was sort of the impact that the game had on so many different areas. It necessitated really telling a deeper story of not just video game, video game, video game, but how skateboarding got to a place where company like Activision would put down a decent amount of budget for a
Hmm.
video game, when there wasn't really that many video games out there. I mean, there are a couple smaller games on small platforms that didn't really do it justice.
Hmm.
There was 720 way back in the day, which I was heavily addicted to as a kid. So there were a lot of different areas that this could have an impact in, and so that's kind of, the we're able to weave and tell the story of how skateboarding got to a place where this video game was able to get made, and then the impact the game made on skateboarding, music, culture, etc. I mean, skateboarding is going to be in the Olympics next year.
Yeah, and I mean,
Which is
no doubt about it, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater had a part in really popularizing the sport. I mean, even from
yeah,
just my perspective, like I never became a skater, but every time I played one of the Tony Hawk games, I felt like I was a complete part of that world, you know? Like the whole culture of skateboarding was so accurately portrayed there, it felt that you could immediately dig into it and sort of understand everything about skateboarding from playing one of those games.
yeah. I mean, we tried to, and that was a big part of the relationship with Tony early on, and all
Hmm.
the other skaters, Jamie and the other skaters that gave us plenty of feedback to try to keep it as legit as possible, so you got a real flavor of what skateboarding is, but yet make it a video game so that it would appeal to video gamers.
Sure.
So I
Yeah.
think the film is going to appeal to video gamer. Of course, obviously the main target, the gamers and the people that love the Tony Hawk series,
Hmm.
but video game lovers in general will like this film. I think people who are impacted by the music, punk rock and Bad
Oh yeah.
Religion, and we interviewed. We got interviews from Bad Religion, Primus, and Feldy from Goldfinger.
Oh,
So
that's so cool.
it's got a nice little cross section.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Jay Bentley from Bad Religion, and Larry Lalonde from Primus. So yeah, it's a nice cross section, and so I think, and then people like me, like I'm a documentary nut just as
Hmm.
bad as a video game nut. I watched millions, and so any like good story, I'm hooked. So I think if somebody's just thumbing through a streaming service and come across it, I think it's one of those that would catch their attention for sure.
Awesome. So, what is the scope of the movie? Will it primarily focus on the creation of like the original Tony Hawk game, or will it get into the sequels as well?
Now we talk about the sequels. We kind of give a a little bit more focus to the early on games,
Hmm.
obviously, because that's where sort of the all the stars align with Tony doing the 900, and
Yeah, right.
everything blowing up, and that sort of especially with anything, the beginning is kind of the most interesting, I think. But
Hmm.
we touch on a lot of the other games as well, and even get into some of the some of the things that brought some of the decline of the video
Hmm.
game, because it's not, it wasn't all just 9.0 scores for
Yeah,
the
right.
franchise, so.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I can remember when I think the last one that I played really extensively was Underground 2, and then after that
Yep.
things started. I feel like that's kind of a common sentiment with a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
it got to a point where there were, we sort of jumped the shark in some areas with adding things that didn't keep it so much to skateboarding. Um, it's hard to recreate everything and make a completely new gaming experience on a brand new generation console. A Tony Hawk game in 9 months, really, it's difficult. So, and then Skate came into play and sort of cut the audience in half a little bit, and yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different factors that came into play. But for me personally, the first two, like the second one for me is sort of my favorite. Although I mean, I do like,
Okay.
the third one with the revert, adding the revert in and all that stuff.
Yeah,
But
sure.
when it started getting to gajillion point combos, I'm sort of out. So, I was more of the earlier on. Those were some of my favorite games. Aside from Thug 2, which is the game that I was able to sneak my band into, Dead End Road, which I was
Oh,
stoked on that
nice.
too.
That's really cool. Yeah, I was gonna ask what your favorite in the series was, so that's great. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
see, I'm a fan of a million point combos just because I love the idea of how when you added the revert, that pretty much completely changed everything, and that it basically brought together the vert and street skating elements of the game like really, really
Yeah.
closely, where you could really link things together.
Yep.
So that's definitely something I was really responsive to. I played so much of Tony Hawk's Underground. Like that game was probably the one I played the most.
Yeah, I didn't mind the revert stuff as much. In fact, the revert was a great addition. What I didn't really care for, all like the shuffle grinds and
Hmm.
those kind of
Sure, yeah.
that kind of stuff, that I just, I don't know. And I know people, it wasn't like we're not going to add it or cater to the
Hmm.
people that were really good enough to do that, but
Yeah,
I
right.
wasn't one of those. So maybe that's why I didn't like it.
No, I totally get it.
Yeah, yeah,
All right,
yeah.
so I think the 20th anniversary of the game just passed in August. Is that right?
Yeah, it
Right.
did. Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's been
It hit
tons
the
of
shelves.
there's tons of gaming publications been putting out features about the game. So I've been reading up a lot about it, and I think one from IGN really delved deep into the culture of Neversoft at the time, and it
Hmm.
seems like it was a really one of a kind place to work.
It was, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it was. Work hard, play hard. It was one of those things when the game was on and when we needed to hit deadlines. I don't think there were teams I would put our teams up against any other team on doing that.
Hmm.
We never slipped. We never had to reschedule dates. We nailed it. And those were back in the days where of course the games were smaller, but you couldn't update them over the internet.
Sure, yeah.
You pressed a disk and that was it.
Hmm.
You had to make sure that you covered everything enough that, the programmers, the programming team, designers, the artists, everybody kicked ass on making the game as solid as possible. So yeah, it led to a very tight crew.
Hmm.
And when a tight crew goes out, they tend to have a very good time. So, I mean, there are many epic Neversoft parties and things that happen. And the skate, we had skate outings all the time. Joel would rent Skate Lab or Skate Street back in the day, and we'd go and skate. That was one of the open offers, is if your first complete, if you're on the team, your first complete, Joel would buy for you. And you just had to use it. You had to go to
Yeah, right.
skate. So having that sort of atmosphere that Joel kind of put out there was nice. The guys on the team all were behind the video game, and it was like a baseball team. When season was on, everyone was on, and
Hmm.
then when vacation time, people took off, and then we came back and rallied again.
Sure, yeah.
Until we got later on in the series where the next game had already really started before the previous game had ended,
Oh,
because
sure, yeah.
you had to get a head start on stuff. So
I mean, you guys were doing
yeah.
the yearly release schedule like pretty early. I don't remember. I can't think of too many games that were doing that at the time.
No, I mean, we were getting compared to games like Madden, and
Yeah, right.
early on we were beating Madden, which is awesome.
Yeah,
But
that's kind of a weird
Madden,
comparison. I mean, those games are not
yeah,
nearly as
yeah,
completely rebuilt. You know.
yeah, you don't have to build a level, add
Yeah.
tricks, add new you have to. I'm not saying those games are easy either.
Right.
They've
Yeah.
got their fair share of difficulties, but having to build completely new skate spots and deal with all of the everything, all the collision, all the stuff around it, and
Hmm.
it's yeah, it was a little, to me it was a lot more daunting than making a sport game that
Hmm.
defined, very defined rules already, and very defined
Hmm.
boundaries and all of that stuff. So yeah, but we had about 9 months. When you take into consideration you had to lock down code before you submitted to Sony or Microsoft or
Hmm.
whatever. So yeah. it was tough.
Yeah, it's crazy for me to think about because, like I said, I mean, I grew up playing these games, so I was really young when they were all coming out. So it seemed like, ages between them. But
Yeah.
I looked it up and I saw, I think Tony Hawk's Underground 2 came out in like 2004, which is like,
Hmm.
barely that much longer after the first game, which it
No,
completely
it
blew
was
my
the year
mind.
2003.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was. So I mean, I shipped it. I was involved on a Tony Hawk team. So we shipped in '99, 2000 to 2006. So '99 to 2006, 8 games.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
such a crazy output.
Eight, and that's eight again, 8 titles. We had to have programmers that could work on, the Xbox version and the PS1 version or
Hmm.
PS2 version, and so you had different versions running as well.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, it was a lot of work.
I can imagine. So I really want to start talking about some of the music. The movie is called Pretending I'm a Superman. So for anybody that's not aware is listening to this, that's a reference to the line from the song Superman by Goldfinger, which I think many fans of the series kind of think of as an unofficial theme song to the Tony Hawk games a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
myself included.
so I recently spoke with a student here at UD and mentioned that I was doing the interview, and his eyes lit up at the thought that I'm talking to the guy that worked on the Tony Hawk games because the music in those games made such an impact in his life, and really formed the basis for his taste in music. And now I think he's even in a band playing music very similar. Um, so the first question I want to ask: how did you guys land on the idea of using licensed music as opposed to like a composed soundtrack? Because I'm pretty sure at the time that wasn't typical.
No, it wasn't very typical, and it just kind of fit the punk rock, skate punk rock all fit really well together.
Hmm.
And I think we had, and the choice of doing that, I think, was before I came on,
Okay.
because I started in December of '98, and it was just after Tony had signed on. We were still had a really early demo, but across the street from us there was a video game. There's an arcade, a bowling alley, the arcade that had Top Skater in it, which was a
Hmm.
stand-up arcade skateboarding game. And in that game, there was a music track behind it, albeit not like regular music. So
Hmm.
I think that inspired, along with the fact that skateboarding videos, there was always, great punk rock music behind it. So it just kind
Yeah.
of made sense to add the music tracks. And the first one, I can't remember the total. I want to say it was under a dozen tracks. And that was primarily, we're on a CD, so we had to fit
Hmm.
the whole game, and then we didn't use the entire songs for the
Hmm.
most part. We cut them down to because we had 2-minute runs,
Hmm.
so we cut things down. But it just kind of gave the game a much better, authentic feel of skateboarding when you have the music behind it.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny
Yeah,
that you mentioned they were cut down. The first Tony Hawk game I played was the first game, but the Nintendo 64 port.
yeah.
And
Oh,
those
then
ones
you
are
had them
real cut
really
down.
cut down. Yeah, yeah.
Really cut down and
Those were
compressed.
those were like, I want to say that was like a 25-second, maybe 30-second
Yeah,
loop,
real short.
if that. And I don't even know if it had every single track in it on the N64 compared to, again, you're talking about a cartridge that
Yeah, right.
had way less than even a CD back then.
Oh yeah. But it still made an impact. Like I always like think of the opening credits with the dead Kennedys playing like that. That's like
Yeah,
iconic to me. Um,
yeah, for sure. It definitely got songs stuck in people's head. Some for a good thing, some for good, some for bad.
So
Yeah.
did you guys realize at the time like what an impact the music would have? Because I really feel like it's taken on a life of its own. I mean, there's so many players that will forever identify certain music with
Yeah.
Tony Hawk. Like, and this is ridiculous, but like the first place that I ever heard Johnny Cash was in Tony Hawk's Underground 2. So whenever I hear like Ring of Fire, I think of Tony Hawk.
Yeah, I mean, I have those same experiences when I hear songs that come from the soundtrack, because I got to hear them when when selecting the songs, and then when testing the game and throughout the testing and all that. Um, I don't think any of us really thought the game was going to be quite the impact was going to have quite the impact it had, much less the soundtrack. I
Hmm.
think for me personally, where it had an impact, and I probably said this in another interview, but where it had an impact for me was it was probably 2001, I think 2002. I went to a Bad Religion concert. I've been a fan of Bad Religion, not a yeah, I've been a fan of theirs probably since high school.
Hmm.
So I went to a concert and Greg on stage mentioned, "Hey, there's a song from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, and it was you." And I was like, "Whoa!" I was like, "Well, that's really cool."
Wow, that's
So I
awesome.
mean, we kind of had an idea, and that was at Pro Skater 2. After, so probably between 2 and 3 is when I went to the concert. So that to me, and I go back to the office like, dudes, you can't believe what I heard at this Bad Religion concert. Of course, back then no one had cell phones with video, so there's no proof of it. But yeah, I mean, that was sort of a cool thing. And then the other indicator, we were getting CDs and we were getting requests from independent bands to be on the soundtrack, and that kind of but that was later on,
Yeah, sure.
after 2, after 3, and so forth. So
Yeah, right.
and that was kind of cool, and just hearing other bands, and I would listen to pretty much everything we got, just to see if there was something we could find, because we had a limited budget, that I had to juggle. It got much bigger at the end, but and you had to cater to a wide variety of music genres, because skateboarding wasn't just punk rock anymore.
Right.
It was,
Yeah.
it encompassed people started skating everywhere, so it was a variety of different music. So if the first one, I can't remember, again, maybe a dozen tracks, the last one was somewhere in the 80 tracks.
Yeah, right.
It was just huge. We let you customize the playlist and all that good stuff. So yeah, it was it that we once we started getting things from people and getting feedback, and then probably prices for songs for us started going up too.
Oh yeah, I was wondering about that, because back when the first game came out, like was it different getting the licensed music than it was later on? Like did did it just get like much
I
more
mean, to be
expensive?
honest, a little bit, not a ton.
Okay.
Because the exposure the other way was equally as good for the bands.
Sure.
Had there been streaming services, we could have probably quantified things. But like, if you go to some of the bands' Spotify and you go to the tracks that on their albums that were in Tony Hawk games, you can see those are usually the more popular ones. So you can kind of guess that it was really good for the band, and we tell that in the documentary as well, that from their mouths, and we give examples of it, which is kind of funny. So it's it wasn't a huge difference. The difference, we got more budget added. And I think the last game I worked on 8, we had probably about a half, $500,000 budget for music. But when you have, if you divide that by 80 tracks, it's not that much money per track. So
Sure.
we had a few, obviously we had a few freebies in there, because if you wanted to get like name tracks like from AC/DC or Johnny Cash, those were going to be 25, 30 grand.
Oh, that's another one. TNT by
Yeah. That was probably one of the most expensive ones that we had.
Yeah, I believe it. So no concrete release date has been announced for the movie, so I'm sure there's only so much you can tell us, but when can we expect to see the film, and how do you think it'll be available? Is this going to be like a streaming service thing, or maybe a theatrical release somewhere?
Yeah, I don't have any details to share on that. I mean, obviously my druthers, I think what'll happen is it'll be streaming, and then perhaps we'll do a one night only kind of theatrical thing, which would be kind of cool to do, just to get people, because I've gotten responses from people that want that as well. But we don't have any concrete plans. Our distribution hasn't been solidified as of yet. We're just kind of going through the last little bit of finishing and tidying up the film. We're trying to get it out for this year. So cool. That's sort of the release plan right now. If there are any updates, just check us out on all the social media at THPS Film, or THPSfilm.com. We've got Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. So, and we'll update as we go on any events and any news in that area. I know, we're stoked that people are excited to have it come out. We just want to make sure it's the best product that we can. So.
I have a question that I'm not sure if you can answer it, but there's one thing in the story of Tony Hawk's Underground that I never quite figured out. How did Eric fake that skate tape? Do you remember?
How did I'm remembering. Yeah, I don't know. I can't tell you.
It's just like a really funny thing because
Live Big probably has some conspiracies as to how he faked it.
I just
Yeah, I
remember
don't
it
know.
was that the kind of thing that like blew my mind because obviously like you're the player character, you do this crazy jump off a roof, but then you see it at the Boom Boom Huck Jam or whatever, and it's Eric there. It's like, wait, he didn't do that trick. So did he?
So they just weaved him in. He
Yeah.
did the beginning of it, and then they cut to this other angle of
Maybe
that.
that's
Yeah,
maybe that's what it was. Yeah, I can't
that's how.
remember.
And if
Yeah.
I'm remembering, you're talking about the big drop off of off the thing in Hawaii, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it was, if I'm recalling correctly, I think it was he cut himself. He did, a shot of himself doing the beginning of it and the
Ah.
end, and then seamed in the other guy at the
Okay,
yeah,
okay. It's been
Eric
so long
Sparrow.
since I played it, so I can't
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
if
yeah.
but yeah.
That Eric Sparrow, that tricky Eric
Oh
Sparrow.
man, that that's an iconic character for a lot of people,
Yeah, that
believe me.
voice actor that did that was I can't remember his name. You could look at the credits, but he was a totally cool
Oh,
guy.
he was
Like,
great. Yeah. He
yeah,
did a great
really
job.
easy to work with. Like, easy. He was a really cool guy. Yeah.
So one other question. So you mentioned the Skate series, and I remember a lot of people when that game first came out, they were talking about, oh, this is like a game that's doing skateboarding like more realistically.
Hmm.
Did you feel that like it was more fun to do things in a less realistic way, or were there people that were kind of pushing you guys to say maybe we should make this game more in line with something that like Skate is doing or something that's a little
Yeah.
more realistic?
Yeah, Mick West, the lead programmer and former Neversoft owner, he talks about this in the doc. People, the whole realism thing for me, if you wanted realism in skateboarding, pick up a skateboard and go out and go skate. You're never gonna get it in a video game,
Right,
and
yeah.
it's fairly inexpensive. You can get it complete for like under $200. So it's you get some pads too. But it's fairly inexpensive. The thing with the realism is when we were coming out, right before Tony Hawk 1 came out, there was a game from Thrasher. It's Thrasher Skate and Destroy. It was from Rockstar.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you played it or saw it or anything. And
I
it
don't think I ever
was it
played it. Yeah.
was it was very and we looked at that quite a bit on the team, but it wasn't something we enjoyed because it was almost as brutal as learning how to not I take that back. Nothing's as brutal as learning how to skate, but
Yeah.
it was just very tough. There was a
Hmm.
very large learning curve. Like, you couldn't just go and do a kickflip. You had to learn how to ollie,
Hmm.
then learn how to the mechanics for flicking the board, and then learn how to kickflip. And we're like, our game sort of gave you all the tricks. You sort of had to learn the control system,
Hmm.
which most people picked up fairly quick.
Hmm.
But it also, in that process, it gave you a good feel of skateboarding without sort of the 9-month lag of having to learn how to skate.
Yeah, right. I mean, I always thought it
So
was like the games are very easy to pick up, but there's a lot of depth to them where you can do a lot with it once you kind of get better at it, which to me was like
yeah,
the perfect balance.
yeah, and that became one of the more difficult things for the designers, and for the designers specifically, was the balance between making things fun for people that, I mean, look, we were building Thug 2. We were still thinking that there are going to be new people that might pick it up first time.
Sure,
This
yeah.
might be their first one. So we have to cater to them. We can't just make it the steep learning curve, because we can't make the scores these impossible figures and things, because our core players can do shuffle grinds and get 1 billion point combos.
Right, yeah, yeah,
So it was a difficult thing to balance, for those guys to balance the goals and the levels and all that stuff, to make it fun for the new players and the novice players, and then to make it equally fun for the super advanced players.
yeah.
So yeah, it was balancing all that stuff was not easy for those guys.
Yeah, I'm sure, but I mean, it really does feel like you hit that balance because those games were massively popular. But I know that there's like this dedicated core group of players also that like takes them to the way next level.
Oh yeah, I mean, there was a group called what was it? A bee goat, they called themselves.
Mhm.
They were the bee goat clan, and they were stand for best glitches of all time. And so they would just go around and basically they were on, when online came around, they would go online and they'd post videos of all the little glitches. They just glitch, and they loved that. It was like, and we kind of, some of those videos led us on to things that, oh, okay, we can fix that next time.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's how that geometry works now. That they're getting around that collision point,
Mhm.
so we can kind of, modify stuff. So there were all different sorts of people that like the game for a variety of different reasons. And that Bigo clan, I think I know there are guys still around that are still, glitching and getting
Mhm.
into Tony Hawk levels and messing around still on private servers or hack
Yeah.
servers.
Right.
Yeah,
Are you
yeah.
aware of Thug Pro?
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard of it. I mean, I don't know what it is. Is it a PC based thing?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
it's a
I don't even
PC
own a PC.
mod. It's a PC
Yeah.
mod of the PC port of Tony Hawk's Underground 2. And
Yep.
what the developers of the mod did was they imported like a ton of stages from like the entire series history, because I think like
Nice.
there's just like there's this audience for the games that really misses them and
Yeah,
misses
I know.
having them on like in a way it's easy to play. And I think a lot of like PC players, like there's a lot of people now that grew up playing games on console and now have like high performance computers and can play games. So I think there's just, yeah, I think people definitely miss the games.
Yeah, I moved after working at Neversoft, I moved over to, I got a job at Tony Hawk. Tony Hawk gave me a job. I went to work for him for 4 years.
Oh wow.
He completely changed my life from a PC guy to a Mac guy, and I've been a Mac guy. I've been a Mac guy ever since.
Nice.
So I haven't looked back, and I don't ever want to go. I mean, I've had to have, my wife's an elementary school teacher, so I've had to work on PCs and help her deal with Microsoft stuff. But that's probably part of the reason they probably don't have, it's not Mac compatible. I'm sure it's probably just all
I think
PC,
it's probably only Windows.
Yeah. Why would they do a Mac version? It makes no sense.
I mean, did you have a Mac version of Tony Hawk's Underground too?
I don't actually know. I didn't, because at Thug 2, I was still a PC guy. So I was like, and then at that point I hated Macs.
That's funny.
So I was like, I probably gave my Mac versions away to somebody. I don't know.
Yeah, it's I think it's funny because there's this big like a lot of games now are getting preserved in a lot of ways. Like you see people like all the times like HD collection of old game from whatever, and I always think like, is it possible for the Tony Hawk games to get something like that? And then I think, well, I don't know, maybe the music licensing is a problem. Was that something that was, there's only a certain deal put in place?
I'm sure.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure that there probably are relicensing issues all around, because the skaters have different sponsors.
Oh,
and,
yeah, that's true.
all of that stuff. The billboards all have Mountain Dew logos.
Yeah, we actually a couple of my friends and I played through Tony Hawk Pro Skater, the first one, after I got in contact with you, and we were like, oh, Mountain Dew, maybe that's why it's not we never got an HD version of this.
Yeah.
Oh, they did make it a remake, I remember, but I don't think many people are that responsive to it.
Not as I don't know as I don't know how it did. I didn't do like any of the Tony Hawk games in the past. One of the things that I think was the beauty of the game was sort of the simplicity of it to begin with. And I think that kind of got a little bit of that got lost in sort of the convoluted, hey, let's add this, let's add that, let's add this, let's add that. And if you keep on doing that and then you add all the cool old levels, you still don't have the old game.
Yeah, that's kind of like what I thought about Thug Pro a little bit, where it's the level geometry's there, you can skate around in them, but and even some of the music, not all of it. I think they have the Underground 2 score, and you can maybe mod in other soundtracks, but like there's still something about like taking out whatever console it was, PS2, GameCube, whatever, and putting in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4 or whatever, and just puts you back in that place.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, like if the whatever it is doesn't grind the way it did when you grinded it 5 million times in the early version, in the first, then it's lost, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You just because that little thing, if it doesn't grind the same, and you don't know that little thing happens to be one of the most popular little things that people use in Tony Hawk 2 to grind on.
Yeah.
that kind of stuff is, so it's as much as it was simple, there were intricacies of it that the users, especially the core group, that are still very vocal and still that noticed it.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
That's what I would imagine. I played a little bit of 5. There were some things in it that along with everybody else that I had some issues that I never like talking bad about Tony Hawk games.
No, I understand. Obviously, like, but I'm sure that there's a lot of history there about when Neversoft eventually like lost the series or stopped making them, moved on to other things, and then I think it kind of got absorbed into Activision a little bit. Yeah, I mean that's my understanding.
It went over to Robomoto, was the other developer.
Yeah, right.
And, and I know there are probably time constraints. I mean, making a game in the time that we were doing is not an easy thing.
Yeah, right.
It's not an easy task. And as much as the game had been around for as long, you had a team that had been doing it for 9 years. I mean, I left and there was one more that was done at Neversoft, which was what? It was after Project 8. American Wasteland? Was it Wasteland?
I think Wasteland was before Project 8.
Okay, American Wasteland Project. I can't even remember now. So they did one more, and then Proving Ground, was it?
Oh, that sounds familiar. Yeah, I think that's
Proving
what it was.
Ground. Yeah, Proving Ground. And then it moved over to another team. Well, I mean, you can't expect that new team to be all up to speed like a team that had been doing it for 9 years.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. It would be a gigantic challenge for anybody to take on.
For sure. But I mean, those original games are definitely iconic. I mean, there's something about them that really, really resonates with people, and I think that's a really special thing. It's kind of rare for anybody to make something like that. So I think you guys should be really proud of yourselves for everything that you did.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, the team, like I said, it was a very dedicated team of programmers, designers, artists, and production people and then everyone over at Activision that were helping to support it, the producers over there that were helping to support it, legal over there that was helping get stuff done, even licensing, getting all the logos, getting all of that stuff in the game is a big task.
Right.
So, and as the game, we started with, like I said, about 13, 14 people. The last game I worked on, about 150 people at Neversoft.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's crazy how the games just kind of the whole production had to skyrocket in order to support it.
Yeah. I mean, one of our animators at Neversoft, he went on. He works at Rockstar. He worked on Red Dead. He was
cool.
Animator, not an animator. He was like a director or manager, whatever. He was a higher up animator, and there was something like 300 people just in animation.
Yeah. It's such a different environment today.
Yeah.
I actually one of the articles that I read, I think what was his name? Silvio Peretta, I think he was.
Yeah, Silvio. Yeah,
the artist.
Yeah, he's our artist. Yeah.
Yeah, he like had a couple of quotes where he noted that the games industry had changed. It's not creative anymore, and games are like all about making money and things like that. And that it's just very different than what it used to be, where I guess maybe now there's just a lot more micromanaging and a lot more money involved. So there's maybe more people that are. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's also the double-edged sword of having almost 100% artistic freedom on Tony Hawk 1, which is what Silvio had.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah, like he could do whatever. Still, it was really that much. And Tony Hawk 2, maybe a little less, because now, marketing needs to get these assets and they want this and that and the other, and then 3, I don't know. I can't remember when Silvio left. But I want to say it wasn't. I think he only was around for 1 and 2, maybe 3. I think maybe 3 too. But he was in, and thankfully, because Silvio's an amazing artist and he should have that ability, and he did a damn good job. But when you've got games that are, the budgets are tens of millions of dollars, you don't, that money has a lot of control behind it.
Yeah, definitely.
And that control means you lose the freedom. So
yeah, of course.
The only way you get that nowadays really is if you come out with your own, cool little mobile title. And I worked on those. I went back and worked on a game it's in the App Store right now, called Transworld Endless Skater, and I did that with the guys at Supervillain Studios, and that was Chris Rausch, who was one of the original designers at Neversoft.
Oh wow!
And Steve Ganem, who was he came on Tony Hawk 2 or 3, and he was a programmer at Neversoft that pretty much got Tony Hawk 3 online, which was the very first
that's awesome
online console game. So that was Steve's programming genius to get all that to happen.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know.
So yeah, we had a team of about 12 people, and it felt very similar to, the Tony Hawk days. But we made a really cool game. It was actually initially for the Win 8, Microsoft Windows 8, that whole big debacle.
Yeah, right.
But they paid the bills, which was nice. So,
yeah, sure. What the hell?
And then the IP reverted back to SVS, Supervillain Studio, and we recreated it for Android and iOS and the Fire TV and all that stuff. And if you play the game on Fire TV with a controller, the controls are very similar to Tony Hawk controls.
I'll have to check that out then.
Yeah. We don't have it's free to play too. We don't have a revert in there, and we don't have the manual, but you can, if you do like the flip tricks and stuff, you'll kind of feel very similar to but it's a left to right, one of those left to right games, and that kind of skateboarding game.
Sure. That
was a really cool feel of the old time of making video games, because a very small team. The big difference is, and what Silvio said is absolutely correct, we put a little bit more attention on gameplay and not enough attention on monetization. Because nowadays, if you don't really focus the majority of your attention on monetization, you could have a really fun game, but if it's not making money, it's not going to be around for very long.
Yeah,
so,
I know that like the games industry is like dealing with how do we make money when games are costing so much to make and we can only charge $60. So you have like, microtransactions and all kinds of other monetization ideas. But and then gamers tend to react very negatively towards any monetization that's not just I paid for the game and I want it.
We give away the game for free and just throw a little banner ad every once in a while and people complain. It's like, wait a minute, you just spent 30 minutes on this game and you saw a couple banner ads and you're gonna give us a 1 star.
It's crazy. But I can imagine back in the day where games were you ship a disc and you're done. It was
you ship it, you're done. You're gonna get $60 a disc, and there's no free to play, there's no microtransactions, there's none of that. But I think those things have added to in some respects have added to the addictiveness and which has added to the popularity of video games.
In a way, for sure.
But for the mobile market, it's just a different beast, and I don't know that I would ever personally, unless I would never personally put my own money into a video game, a mobile video game. No way. I would work on one if it was for the right reason, for the right, whatever. I would, but I just know that the focus would have to be so much on monetization, not gameplay. Once you get the monetization and you work the gameplay around the monetization, unless it's just a marketing thing and you don't really care about making money, then I'm down to do that too.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
So, if a movie studio wants to make a really cool game and they just to blow out, marketing budget, let's do it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Actually, like I said, we recently replayed the first Tony Hawk game, and we got to the end credits, and I'm reading through the end credits, and I don't know if you remember the end credits of the first game, but they're very like funny. I think every developer has
the
like
never ever soft team.
There's tons of like special messages. I just have one question, and maybe you remember this. There's one credit in there that says special no thanks to whales, the vermin of the sea.
Right.
Where did that come from? What was that?
I have to double check with Mark Scott, but I'm almost certain that came from a Viz article. Viz is an English like Mad Magazine, like you know what Mad Magazine is?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like an English version and a little bit more raunchy, and they actually have a Facebook page. They probably have Instagram. I'm fairly certain that came out of Viz. That totally sounds it sounds very English, and it's like that comedy. So I'm fairly certain that that's where that came from.
That's so funny. I mean, like,
Yeah.
just like reading through that credits, that's what really struck me. Where I was like, this was a game made by just a group of guys. Like
Yeah.
it's so personal. There's so much personality in it, and yeah, it's just
Yeah, and
crazy.
I totally that whales vermin of the sea. I completely remember that. I remember that going around the office or something. I remember that saying. But I'm fairly sure it was from that from Viz. Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Ralph, thank you so much for joining me today. This was really a treat.
Awesome. Yeah. No worries. This was fun as well. I always like talking to people that were fans of the game, because I myself am a huge fan of the game, and I still play older versions of it, and yeah, I'm stoked on still trying to be a part of it.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. We will see you next week.